Oh man, I get a smile on my face every time I hear that tune. I got to thank Peter Trulin for putting that fantastic track together. Because when you hear that tune, it means you are in for a treat, folks. It's time for another week of the Rec Poker edition. This is the forums edition of the podcast, where I get to hang out with my poker friends and talk strategy. Regular listeners know we also do the chats edition of the podcast once a week, where we talk to someone interesting from the poker world about their life and what the world of poker means to them. But this is the forums. We're just going to talk some straight strategy. And tonight we've got an awesome hand from Binkley about an online cash hand. But first, I have to tell you, of course, if you don't know what is going on here, this is the Rec Poker podcast. What's Rec Poker, you say? Well, we are a group of enthusiastic amateur poker players. We love the game. We love studying the game. We love helping other people learn the game. We celebrate together. We commiserate together. And we do it all mostly for free at rec.poker. So I'd encourage you, if you've enjoyed the show in the past and you want to see what all the fun is about, head on over to rec.poker right now. All it takes is an email address and a smile to get your free community account. And while they are both mandatory, I think you'll agree it's worth the price of admission. A lot of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization. So I have to thank our sponsors, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. I have to thank our premium members because we've got more and more of them every week, every month. It's great seeing the community grow here. One of the perks of being a premium member is you're welcome to come join the show here on Zoom. We do the chats edition on YouTube live on Monday nights, but we have a more intimate group for our forums editions. We record these over Zoom, and premium members are welcome to join it, and I love it when they do. The Wrecking Crew is the last component of all the magic making over here. You get used to hearing my voice because they let me host the podcast on Mondays. But I am just one of a group of fantastic folks that love poker just as much as you do. They are called the Wrecking Crew. And if you want to find out more about the Wrecking Crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew. You can learn about me. My name's Jim Reed. I'm Bluffsterini in the home game and at Rec Poker Jim on Twitter. Or you can learn about the other members of the Wrecking Crew like Rob Washington, who you're going to meet right here tonight.
I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Rabman50 just about everywhere.
So we've mentioned the sponsors, we've mentioned the premium members, we've mentioned the Wrecking Crew. All that's left is to dive into the action. So I'm excited. This is going to be a cash hand. We talk about tournament play here a lot, but Eric Jin, who goes by Binkley, another Wrecking Crew member, is a cash game enthusiast. He plays live, he plays online. We're looking at a hand here from Ignition, an online platform where the stakes are 50 cent, $1 on their 6 max cash platform. So we are sitting here at 50 cent, $1. Most of the players are relatively deep stacked. Most of them have over 100 big blinds. We're sitting on $100, which is 100 big blinds and chips. And the other players that will become involved in the hand have us covered. So we're in the big blind. We are dealt the 9 of spades, 7 of spades. So it folds around to the cutoff, who's playing on about 134 big blinds. They raise 250, and it folds around to the hero, who completes in the small blind and just calls, closing the action. So I guess we're going to talk. Well, okay, let's talk about the whole hand, and then we'll ask some questions.
Actually, it was the big blind. He called the raise in the big blind.
Yes. Oh, sorry. That's what I meant to say. Thank you for the correction, Rob. So we got an open from the cutoff to 2.5 big blinds. Our hero calls from the big blind. The board comes 10 of clubs, 3 of clubs, 5 of spades. There's 550 in the pot. Hero checks. The cutoff bets $1.73, or about a third. The hero calls, and we'll talk about the action in just a moment, but I just want to run through the hand first. The turn comes the queen of spades. The pot's $8.96. So that's the 10 of clubs, 3 of clubs, 5 of spades, queen of spades. We pick up a flush draw. We check, and the villain checks behind, which is interesting. The river comes the 10 of spades, pairing the board and bringing in the backdoor flush draw for us. So the final board, 10 of clubs, 3 of clubs, 5 of spades, queen of spades, 10 of spades. Hero leads into the pot of 896 for about a third pot, $2.81. The cutoff raises to $9.88. And we are left with the decision of whether to, just like so many of these times, you can call, you can fold, or you can raise. Those are kind of like the big three when it comes to typical poker games. And the only other information we have is that Villain is a regular player with stats of 26, 26, 0 over 29 hands. So over 29 hands, I don't know how we can decide that they're a reg or not. Maybe Eric had some. This is an anonymized playing site, so I'm not sure what information he had other than that. But 26 VPIP, 26 PFR, 0% 3-bet. So this is a player that at least over 29 hands is playing actively. We can say that at least they're not a passive player, and that's about all I would derive from this. But I haven't been there playing with this guy for the same 29 hands that Eric has. Maybe Eric's got some good information there. So the question really comes down to, the question Eric's asking is, how do we respond when faced with this raise on the river? But I've got a few questions I want to get into going all the way back to pre-flop. And I want to encourage our folks, if you're listening to the podcast, I'm going to put the link in the show notes, the link to this forum post. So you can go and click on it. You don't even need a free account to view the forums. You only need to sign up in order to respond. Go check it out, because there's some great responses here from 5x5, Eric, our own Rabman 50 here. And there's more details in the post than I can really break out over the air here, but we're going to do our best to kind of approximate the conversation and tease out some interesting information here. I love looking at these cash hands because we talk about tournaments all the time, but it's so much more fun talking about cash hands every once in a while. Maybe I'm just a degenerate that way, but I love it so much. So one of the things that people talk about being a big difference between cash and tournament play is open raise sizing, bet sizing, that kind of thing. In tournaments, you can size down a bit and still leverage a lot of fold equity. You can still threaten your opponent's stack and their tournament life with a lot of, to great effect with smaller sizes. In cash games, when you don't have to worry about busting and going home at the end of the day, sizes tend to get larger. So the one thing that struck me about this is it's six-handed, 100 big blinds deep. Our cutoff opens to 250, which is a 2.5x raise, which is perfectly typical for tournaments. When I see this sizing in cash games, sometimes it makes me think that maybe this player is a tournament player who's still kind of trying to get a dip a toe into cash. But I understand that, as people are playing more of each, the smaller sizes in cash games are becoming more in vogue. Rob, you were shaking your head there a little bit. What does that make you think?
In 6-max cash games online, 2.5 is a very, very typical opening. Now, if you go to the casino in a 1-2 game, for instance, 1-2 cash game, you're never going to see a 2.5. You're never going to see a $5. It's going to be like 8 to 10, probably. That's what your opening sizes are going to be. But I've been finding, as I play more and more cash online, that the 2.5 sizing is very, very common, even by those really, really tough players. I've been playing enough that I've got, hundreds of hands on a lot of different players, and a lot of the very tougher ones, the more successful ones with the best stats, they're opening 2.5. Unless, somebody limps ahead of them and then it changes things, but they're opening 2.5 a lot, especially in 6-max.
So one of the main differences between tournaments and cash is in tournaments, you kind of pay your rake right at the beginning as part of your buy-in fee. And when you're playing cash, you pay rake every hand that goes to the flop. The card room will take some money out of the pot. And then once it reaches a certain threshold, they'll take some more money out of the pot. So there's an incentive as cash players not to go to as many flops as there would be in tournaments. So not to limp as much, to size up a bit. Like you, it's better for you if your players in the big blind fold than if they call and now you see a flop and the rate gets taken out of the pot. So I think a really important question is the players in the big blind, how are they feeling about open sizes? Because if they're going to be defending at the same frequency to a 2.5x open as they will to a 4x open, then it definitely makes more sense to be opening to 2.5x because you can still play the range of hands that you'd like to, and you're not actually increasing the chance that they're going to call. I think that's kind of the essence of some of the sizing stuff, particularly pre-flop when it comes to the difference between cash and tournament play. And it doesn't surprise me that the online games are a little more disciplined, a little more rigorous when it comes to the percentages of big blinds and that kind of thing, because the online games tend to be like a more math focused game, I think, whether it's tournaments or cash. So, Rob, when you're in the big blind, cutoff raises to 2.5. I mean, we're going to have a really wide defending range here. 9-7 suited feels like a slam dunk call. You could even, depending on
any two suited, pretty much any two suited, you're going to call with.
And this is part of the problem with the opening size, is that you're giving the big blind a fairly trivial decision with a lot of their range, which they might put to it. Yeah.
But you're not worried about that when you're in the cutoff, because your range is going to be so much stronger than that range. I mean, when it comes to the equity buckets that you're going to be looking at, you're going to be so far ahead of everything that he calls with. Now, obviously, it's flop dependent, but in general, you don't mind him calling with that wide range. You want him to, because you're getting a little bit more money in the pot, and you're going to be so far ahead of him when it comes to the flop that, you invite him. You want him to come along.
Yeah, any chance you get to play a pot in position with range advantage against one or two players, that's what our friend Sky Matsuhashi refers to as a bread and butter spot. And that's why opening in late position is such a profitable strategy. You should do it as often as possible because it creates these great scenarios where you're able to take advantage of your opponent's capped range and lack of position. So I like what you're saying there, Rob. That makes a lot of sense. I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but is this the kind of hand that you might occasionally 3-bet out of the blinds if you're having like a polarized 3-betting range?
No, I wouldn't. If it's a hand that I chose before I started that this is going to be my bluffing hand, maybe, but no, typically not. I mean, you're going to want to have a polarized 3-betting range, obviously, but this would not be one of them.
Doesn't have any blockers. It benefits a lot from seeing a flop. But can you give us a couple examples of some other hands that might be better candidates for that 3-bet bluff here?
Hands like ace-5 suited is a good 3-bet bluff. Obviously you're going to 3-bet your kings and your ace kings and your ace queen type hands. I like to 3-bet with any ace-10 or better. A lot of times I might check my aces just for, just to have some really strong hands in my checking range. But otherwise, pocket pairs, jacks through aces, anything ace-10 or higher. And then I would probably just call with my other broadways, my other suited broadways. And then I'd throw in a few hands like maybe jack-10 suited as a 3-bet bluff, maybe ace-5 suited as a 3-bet bluff, and then maybe something like ace-5 offsuit as another bluffing hand. So I've got, the rest of the hands I want to play, I want to call with, because they play so much better post flop. Like all your suited connectors and your suited hands in general are going to play so much better post flop than you don't want to be raised off of them again if you try to bluff with them.
Yeah, we've got some comments in the chat here from one of our new premium members, Tim. who agrees with you, Rob, about the open sizing and how, the best players online are kind of coming down to that more tournament style size, which makes a lot of sense. And he also suggests ace 10 as a 3-bet candidate in spots like this. And says, when you bet more often, you bring the sizing down a little. Right. Yes. As your range expands, the sizing comes down. And that affects not only your pre-flop openings, but also, like we're talking about here, your 3-bets. And that makes perfect sense. I like that as well.
Yeah, he's questioning my ace 10 3-bet, but that's a very easy hand. If you 3-bet it and get 4-bet, you can just throw it away.
I think he was actually suggesting it as a 3-bet candidate as you were saying it. Yeah, that's right. He's saying no. He was saying that would be a good hand to do it for, and exactly for that point, Rob. Because, and I like that ace 10, ace jack, king queen kind of hands, because as you say, when you 3-bet, when your opponent 4-bets, you're clearly behind and you can fold very comfortably. But when they call, you're actually still ahead of their calling range quite a bit. And so you've managed to leverage some extra money into the pot when you're still ahead. And sometimes they fold, which is great. And when you're holding hands that have like an ace or a king or a queen in them, it's just more likely that your opponent does not have one of those premium hands. And so that makes a great candidate for those 3-bet bluffs. And the other point I want to make to folks is that you don't actually need that many 3-bet bluffs in order to balance out your range. They add up pretty quickly, and particularly if you add a hand like ace 10 offsuit, that's a lot of combos. If you're 3-betting ace 10, ace jack, king queen offsuit, that's already a huge portion of your overall range, and you can actually kind of get into trouble by over 3-betting with some of those like middle hands where you're not sure if you're 3-betting for value or as a bluff. If you're not sure if you're 3-betting for value or as a bluff, you should be calling and then choose some better hands to 3-bet for value and some worse hands to 3-bet as a bluff. Yeah, as Tim says, it can get expensive. Yeah, you said it, man.
Well, a lot of the times it's understanding your opponent's opening range. That helps determine what your 3-betting range should be. If this person's a very, very tight person that, is, say his stats are something like 21-18 after 300 hands, well, I'm not going to be 3-betting him quite as loosely as I would somebody that has a much wider range, because he's going to have a lot more hands that he can call me with than somebody that's 35, 20.
Right.
For instance, I'm just thinking of HUD ranges.
And some players you might not even choose to have a polarized 3-betting range against at all. As Rob's kind of getting at there, some of those very tight players that are only opening very tight, they're not going to have a lot of folds, and so you should really just be 3-betting against them with a tight linear range yourself. And folding and calling with the rest. Yeah, Tim says
70-12. Yeah,
70-12. We all know those players. There's some 70-12 players.
3-bet him all day long.
All day. Yep, exactly. That's funny. That's awesome. Okay, so now I just want to explore that space a little bit, because I think people get caught up on like, oh, well, I have to 3-bet these hands for board coverage and to to have a mixed strategy, so I'm more difficult to play against. I mean, there are elements of truth into that, but don't fancy play syndrome yourself when it comes to this kind of stuff. And it really is opponent dependent. As long as you've got a few bluffs in there, don't worry about covering every board perfectly. Don't worry about having a perfectly balanced range. Your opponents are not playing in a balanced fashion, so you shouldn't really be playing in a balanced fashion either. Just try and exploit the mistakes that they're making. Okay. This whole hand is about a river spot. We spent the first 15 minutes talking about pre-flop, but that's just how it goes. Found a few rabbit holes down here, Rob. So we call, which I think is what everyone's saying that we should be doing here. 9-7 of spades. The flop comes 10 of clubs, 3 of clubs, 5 of spades. Not a great flop for us, but also not a great flop for the cutoff opener. They're going to have a lot of 10x hands. their range is still uncapped. They could have all the overpairs and all the best hands available, but most of their range is going to intersect with this by making like a pair of tens and then having some backdoor straight draws or something on the side of it. We check cutoff bets relatively small. Hero calls, I mean, 10, 3, 5, two tone. We're really only playing with backdoors here. So this is a spot where I think Eric got a sense that this player is going to be c-betting a lot. Maybe they don't follow through on future streets as much. And so you can call a little wider here, even though you don't really have a lot of equity in the hand to draw to like a typically strong made hand. This is one of those spots where I think you've got more equity than you think. You've got backdoor flush draws, backdoor straight draws. You could even still be ahead if you flop a pair. So I don't mind the call here.
When I went through this with Flopzilla, I put in his range at 26%. I just stuck that in, just a generic 26%. Based on this bet and the bet size, I did not reduce his range whatsoever based on his action on the flop. So in other words, he's betting his entire range on this flop to a 1/3 sizing. There's no doubt about it, because the big blind is going to miss 60% of the time. So you can bet your entire range, and 60% of the time, your opponent is just going to fold, and you're going to take it down, and then you go on to the next hand. So this is one of those spots where you should bet frequently to a small sizing.
Just like Tim was saying earlier, the more often you bet, the smaller that sizing gets. And there are certain boards that you, and when I say you, I'm speaking to our cutoff player, who's the open raiser here. They should be c-betting at a high frequency, which means they should be c-betting to a small size. Eric knows that, and so he can continue with a pretty wide range of hands here. When the turn comes to Queen of Spades, we check and our opponent checks behind. And this is exactly the kind of spot that Eric was looking for, where our opponent has now weakened their range by not double barreling on the turn. Rob, I think I'm just going to kind of turn the analysis over to you here, because you, in your amazing response to this post here, you opened up Flopzilla and got pretty deep into the hand. When our opponent checks behind, I think intuitively a lot of us feel like that weakens their range. It also kind of removes it removes from their range all the hands that they would have taken an aggressive action. And you use Flopzilla to find out what those kind of hands are. Can you just tell our folks a little bit about
that's the key? That's the key to this whole hand right here, is this check. Now he's going to bet his entire range on the flop. We know that. He gets called. So now he has a decision to make on the turn. If he has a queen, does he bet?
On the turn?
If he has queen, on the turn. If he has 100%. Queen 10, is he going to bet with queen 10?
100% he's going to bet.
Exactly. So right now we know that he does not have queen 10 in his range. Now, is he going to continue his aggression if he had gained a flush draw? So if he had 2 spades, would he have upped his aggression again? Because now he's got a flush draw.
And that's one of the things you're looking for when you make that. So when you make that c-bet with your range like this, what you're going to do is you're going to continue on favorable turns. And so Correct. If you do pick up a flush draw, you'd be crazy not to continue that aggression, because that's one of those turns that you were looking for. So I would say, yes, they probably would continue betting if they'd picked up the flush draw.
Correct. Yeah. So the fact that he checks, I can remove a lot of stuff out of his range. I can remove all top pair hands out of his range. All 2 pairs are out of his range, because he didn't have hardly any to start with anyway on a 10-5-3 board. He didn't have any 10-5s. He might have had, he didn't have any 3-5s either. So he had no 2 pairs to start with in his range. If he had 2 paired now with the queen, he would have bet it. So we can take those 2 pairs out. Set of queens, probably bets.
Yep.
Because we got a call from, the button or the big blind. So we want to continue to try to get money in the pot. If we all of a sudden spiked if we have ace queen, we're going to bet. So we don't have any queens in our range. We still have a lot of tens in our range, but we don't have any queens. We have clubs in our range because he should still have clubs. He might bet a flush draw here, a club flush draw as a second barrel.
Yep.
So he should still have some of those in his range, but for the most part, he doesn't have the hands that we're worried about.
Mm-hmm.
Now we checked, and he checked behind. So then we go to the river, which is the 10 of spades, which is our gin card. It gives us our flush, right? It gives us our flush. We already have determined that if he had a flush draw better than ours, he would have probably bet it, because what kind of flush draws is he going to have? He's going to have, we have the 9, so he's going to have king, jack of spades, ace, king of spades, ace, jack of spades. Those are the kind of flush draws he's going to have. He might have, some random ace 8, ace 6, ace 4 type, suited hands that he would, but any of those ace high flush draws are typically going to bet and try to get more money in the pot. So he doesn't have any of those. And then we bet out small. Trying to get some value with our flush, trying to get him to call with, what are we trying to get him to call with? Trying to get him to call with a pocket pair of jacks, maybe. He might have checked jacks because the queen's on the board now. Yep. Maybe he's got 9s or 8s, some pocket pair like that. Any 10. Because he can't have the full house, because there's no 10-5s or 10-3s in his range. He might have pocket 5s or pocket 3s, but he probably would have bet those on the turn also. So we take all of the sets out. There's no sets in his range. There's no full houses in his range. There's no 2 pairs in his range. There's no queens in his range. So what's left? Ace highs that had an ace of clubs or an ace of spades, and 3 10s.
Yep. And maybe some club combos that gave up on the turn and then decided now. But again, you got to think if your opponent was liable to be aggressive with that busted flush on the river, you'd expect that they'd also use it as an opportunity to bluff the turn, to semi-bluff the turn. And I think, when I looked at this hand, I saw the queen of spades on the turn and the check back by our opponent. And I thought to myself, well, they just can't have any strong hands here, because when you've got 10-3-5 queen two-tone, that's just way too wet a board to check back your value hands on. There's 2 straights that could come in. There's 2 flushes that could come in. It's a very dynamic hand. Your opponent could have all sorts of pieces of it plus draws. You'd really have to be betting a lot of your very strong value hands. And I knew that intuitively, but then I love Rob. When you go into this and you start breaking down the actual hands combo by combo, you see how rare the value hands are remaining for our opponent here. And this is why. So listen, we don't make $1 off anyone who buys Flopzilla. But I just want to tell people, Flopzilla is such a valuable study tool. There's no other program like it that lets you get into this level of detail, this way of putting different hands together in buckets, this way of kind of cutting it between different suits, and the way that they have the ability to sort by hand strength is just, it's a phenomenal tool. Again, we don't profit from people buying it, but I tell everyone, if you haven't, it's like $30, buy it once and use it for the rest of your life. If you know how to use it, you will get a lot out of it. And if you don't know how to use it, come over to the free Rec Poker forums and post in there. Tons of our Wrecking Crew members have done dozens of videos on how to get the most out of Flopzilla, using it in their analysis. And this way that Rob's using it here is exactly the way that it's meant to be used. And I just can't reinforce that point enough. So don't be a Jim. Don't be someone who's just like, oh, yeah, you can't have any strong hands there. You do them this way. Be a Rob and go through and actually count the combos that are available to your opponent. Because when you actually go hand by hand through their range, it's hard to do in the abstract. But folks, this is what's going to make you a better poker player. Go and examine their range hand by hand, and you will see they just don't have that many value hands here. So the question is, do they have bluffs here as well? So anytime we're in a position like this where we're considering calling a raise, we have to think about, are we ahead of their value hands? Do they have enough bluffs? Or are we only ever going to be behind their value hands that are making this action? In this case, I think we can eliminate a lot of the value hands that we're behind.
Yeah.
They could be, we'll find some of the bluffs, some of those busted flush draws, or maybe some busted straight draws or something that could. And I think the real key is that they could have some 10x hands that they are maybe thinly value raising, and perhaps improperly thinly value raising. Then if we can beat their thin value, then it does feel like this is coming around to a call.
I think a hand, the 10x hands that he has probably should raise. The fact that it was a backdoor flush, it went spade.
Mm-hmm.
Eric called on the flop, so he's the villain is not putting him on the flush. He's not putting him on a flush. He's putting him on a 5 or maybe a pocket pair under the 10s. You know, that's the kind of hands that he's targeting, I think, with his bet. And it wasn't a check raise because Eric was out of position. So it was an actual Eric bet out, and which is not a donk bet. It's more of a probe because there was no betting. He gave up the betting lead on the turn. So it's a probe bet into the river that Eric put out there from the big blind. And now he's raising. And I'm so positive that he's raising with a 10 there. And he can't have queen 10, and he can't have 10-5 or 10-3. So he can't have a full house. There's no way he can have a full house. And the bluffs in his range, there's still a lot of bluffs in his range. Those ace high hands with a spade could be a bluff because they weren't flush draws ever. You know, any ace of spades or king of spades could be a bluffing candidate right here. Because if he was stuck around with ace king offsuit with the ace of spades or the king of spades, any of those ace combos with the ace of spades could have stuck around and be in here trying to bluff us off because they have the nut blocker. That's the kind of bluffs that you're going to run into, but you're not going to run into any flushes. I mean, if you look at the hands that he could possibly have, I mean, I put on my Flopzilla, I end up that he has maybe 11% flushes, but it's really, really remote that he could have any flushes here at all. He's got 26% of the time he has 3 of a kind, and 62% of the time he has an ace high hand. So we have 88% equity right now with our flush, and Eric's wondering what he should do. Should he call or should he raise? So
and let's stop there.
If you raise, what do you want to get called by?
I want to go one step back even and say, you know, we're here. We've got a 9 high flush on a paired board. And I think a lot of players might be getting nervous in this spot and thinking, well, I don't have a very high flush. There's a paired board out there. They could have a set. Listen to what Rob's saying here. You know, they don't. I mean, they might some micron, some super tiny percentage of the time. But this is a spot where a lot of recreational players are going to see monsters under the bed and feel like they need to like pot control. Maybe I'll just check call or maybe even check fold, heaven forbid. a board like this, well, there's a paired board. They don't have a very high flush. That don't play scared poker like that. Play against your opponent's entire range. Don't play against just the best hands that they could have, because, well, yeah, right, Rob, as you're saying, it's just
and the key to ranging your opponent and what he ends up to the river with has a lot to do with his range starts really big up here, right? And then it gets narrow and narrow and narrow. We've already taken the queen tens out of his range. And we've already taken the 10-5s and the 10-3s out of his range. So there is no other full houses possible. If he had pocket queens, we would have heard from him on the turn. If he had pocket fives, pocket threes, we would have heard from him on the turn.
And so sometimes he'll have a higher flush, but it's such an infrequent amount of the time that you can't tailor your action against that. You have to think about their entire range that's taking this action. How are you doing against that range?
You could raise this river and then fold to a re-raise.
Yes. Yeah.
If you are convinced that he has ace king of spades, for instance. But I still posit that he would have bet the ace king of spades on the turn.
On the turn. Yep. You would have continued that aggression with his flush draw combos.
Yep.
And so folks, if you agree with the assumptions that Rob and I are making about this player's hand, if they on the turn, if they would have bet their sets, if they would have continued betting their flush draws, if they would have bet their two pairs, then the very nature of hand reading is that when they don't, on the next street, those hands are not in the range anymore. And you can't go adding them back in afterwards just because it feels like it's a scary spot and they might have it.
That's what we do all the time.
I know.
We do that all the time as recreational players. We get to the river and we don't think about the action that we got there with, and we go, "Oh God, he could have this, he could have that." Well, if you do your due diligence and go through it street by street, you realize, well, no, he can't. He can't have any of those. The only thing he can have here is 3 10s.
And so we're getting some really good comments in the chat here from DJ and Tim. So DJ is wondering, like, what is our opponent's value target when they raise the river here, which is, I think, a really good point. So I think Rob's kind of nailed it. I think it's very likely that this opponent has a 10. That's how this feels. They bet the flop with top pair. They checked the turn when the queen came. Now they're taking an aggressive action on the river when they trip their 10. So that's a pretty savvy, because they're thinking the same thing, Rob. They're thinking, I can raise here and still fold to a 3-bet from Eric if Eric has a full house or a flush, but maybe I can get called by one of Eric's second best hands. So I don't think that raising the 10 is necessarily a problem. If they were really deep and they like jammed the 10, that would be a mistake. But giving themselves the opportunity to raise fold, I don't see that being a big problem.
There's a lot of hands that Eric could call with here. Any queen. Eric could have a bunch of queen jacks. He could. Queen jack type hands that would have checked the turn, hoping to get a bet out of the aggressor. And when he didn't, goes ahead and bets the river. I mean, a queen, any kind of queen high hand or any hand with a queen in it, and Eric's going to have a ton of those, could be betting here, and he'd be ahead of with his 10s. So there is a lot of value that he can get by raising with his 10s.
Yeah, but I agree with DJ. It is that kind of thin value, but I think it's a savvy move. I think a lot of other players would be tempted to just call there. And I think they're kind of leaving some money on the table, because these thin value bets, these thin value raises, that's an area where recreational players are leaving money on the table. And you just have to be comfortable with folding. You have to be comfortable with folding when they don't call, when they come back over the top. They have to find their own range to be stronger than your thin value. And that's what Eric's getting at here. So Eric's now thinking, okay, I can't fold. because I'm too high in my distribution and my opponent doesn't have enough value hands for me to be behind here. And there's a good point from Chris Jones in the post here too. He says we're beat some of the time here, but we bet so small on the river that there's a significant amount of 10x value that we beat. And he says I'm just always calling here, especially in a cash game. But I like that because Eric's response is, should we then 3-bet to try and extract more value? And I think that would be a problem, because for the same reason, it's hard to find a hand that your opponent will call with that's still behind your 9 high flush. So maybe if you like knew they would call with a 10, but I think they're probably going to be savvy enough to fold when they raise your river bet with a 10, and then you re-raise on top of it. So it feels to me like the call was the right play for Eric. And I think you were saying, Rob, that kind of bears out in your analysis.
Yep. And the interesting thing is I have for ace 10 suited, there's 2 combos, the diamonds and the hearts. We don't have any of the clubs, and the spades are obviously not there because there's a 10 of clubs and a 10 of spades on the board.
Yep.
So the ace 10s, there's only 2 combos of those, and the king 10s, there's only 2 combos, and the jack 10s, there are only 2 combos of the suited variety.
Yeah, I guess they could be opening. Yeah, sorry, you were going to say.
Then there's 6 combos of ace 10 off, king 10 off, and jack 10 off, because again, there's 2 10s on the board. So those are the hands that we're up against. So there's that 2, 4, 6, 18. So there's 24 combinations of hands that have 10s in them.
That's a lot.
And that's really the biggest hand. There's a lot of ace high hands. So there's a lot more ace high hands with no 10, with a spade potential or a club.
Yeah. So I think, I love these comments in the chat here. We're getting some from Tim here as well. It gives you that unconscious confidence over time. Yeah, exactly. Thinking about this stuff and being immersed in it, getting these reps. I think that is the goal, to sort of attain that unconscious or subconscious competence over time. I think that's right. And when we first started talking about this hand, I also felt like the raise on the river felt a little spazzy, like maybe they're self-owning themselves, like Tim mentions here. But I do think we also have some queens. We also have some 10s, maybe worse 10s, that could call. And if we're deep enough, and these players are, that they can get away from a rejam, then I don't think it's as spazzy as I did originally. I think it's actually pretty savvy thin value, although it is it's higher variance and it's riskier.
Yeah, but if you think of the way the hand is played out, again, he's not giving a lot of credit to Eric having a flush.
Yeah,
because it's the backdoor.
It's the backdoor. Yeah.
What is he calling with on the flop that gets there with a flush on the river? So he's looking more like hands that are queens. Any queen hand, any hand that Eric has that has a queen in it, could be betting out on this river. And the way it played out, he could be betting with pocket 9s, pocket 8s, pocket 7s, pocket 6s for that matter. Any of those pocket pairs could be there. Now he's not going to get value from those. Those are going to fold. So he's only going to get value from those queen hands, those hands that have a queen in them.
Yeah. So I wonder, it's so villain dependent. Eric makes the argument here that if we do 3-bet the river, we can get called by some of those better trip hands like ace 10, king 10. I think that's true. And I guess, according to your analysis, Rob, like that's pretty much the top of their range here. Like, I guess they have some of those bigger flushes, but not a lot of them. And maybe that, I don't know. At first I was thinking that calling was the right play, because if we 3-bet the river, we're really not targeting the right part of their range, but maybe it's exactly the right part of their range to be targeting those trips. But do they
Yeah,
pay
you
off?
could get
That's the question. Do they pay off? Because
well.
your
That's
move
the
looks
thing.
really strong now. Like your move
You
looks
don't right. You don't necessarily know if they will pay you off, but you'll never find out if you don't try.
yeah, that's true.
They never will pay you off if you never raise. So, if you could raise to an amount that you feel comfortable folding if they go over the top of you, then that would be you could do that. I could see doing that.
Yep.
That you have to be confident though that your read is exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know that sitting at the table, it's so much different when it's happening right in front of you and you've got like 40 seconds to make a decision of what you're going to do.
Oh, so little
You're
time.
not,
Yeah.
it's very, very difficult to run all these combinations in your head and understand that, hey, you're way ahead of his entire range. Um, and that's what I think Tim mentioned, that speed is what gets
Mm-hmm.
us. The
Mm-hmm.
speed of the when you have to evaluate this. If you're sitting at a live poker table, you have all the time in the world. You can sit there and think about all of this stuff.
Yep.
Go back through the hand and say, okay, could he have this? Could he have this? Could he have this? No, he doesn't have any of that crap. I'm going to raise. Well,
Mm-hmm.
here you're online and you got like 30 seconds and, things are happening pretty fast. So I don't blame anybody at all right here if they didn't raise and just called.
Yep.
That wouldn't blame anybody at all for doing that.
It's so funny. Tim and I were actually just talking earlier today about this exact scenario. How, you're used to playing online, you're used to making quick decisions, and you can't go all the way through the decision tree here and look at all those combos in the 30 seconds plus 10-second time bank that you have. And what that means is that you're more of a Jim. You're more of I think he folded most of his big hands, but you don't have a chance to be a Rob. And again, I just want to encourage people to be a Rob anytime you can and take that kind of like methodical approach. And this is why it's important to do this stuff between hands, between sessions. You're not pulling Flopzilla out at the table anyway, but the more you can do this in between sessions, do this in the lab, off the felt, you're going to create in your mind a better approximation of what these correct answers are, of what the decision tree is, and you'll give yourself a better chance of just kind of naturally having that inclination or something close to the answer in real time while you're playing. Another comment from DJ here talking about how getting inside the head of the opponent is a crucial part of this. I think you really do need to think about, what is my opponent value targeting? What is my opponent bluff targeting? What are they trying to achieve with the bet sizing that they've chosen here? And then be a Rob. Let that influence the hands that you remove from their range. And once you remove those hands from their range, you just cannot add them back in. Yeah, and DJ and Tim are both talking about this in the chat here. I mean, it's a challenge. It's a challenge online because you have so little time, but you have perfect data from your HUD. Whereas live, you have all the time in the world, but you only have your own faulty brain to remember what the information is. So you do kind of have to pick your poison there, because there's pros and cons to both, and there's ways to get tripped up by both here. I mean, this is a really good conversation, Rob. Is there anything that we should mention about this that we haven't?
We could share the actual results of the hand.
Please
Because
do.
he did come in at the end and saying he kind of came to the conclusion himself that he said, my thinking was that I lose to full houses and better flushes. Value target was only trips, and that seemed too thin in the moment. So, however, I now think that I should have raised. On the turn, there are 2 flush draws, sets, and 2 pairs would very rarely, never check the turn, and this rules out full houses. And that's what we were able to do because we had all the time in the world sitting in our desk here, running it through Flopzilla.
Yep.
Picking up the extra equity of the backdoor flush draw, villain likely bets the turn. And again, that's what we talked about. This is the stuff that we're verifying with our Flopzilla work. So making our backdoor flush makes the strength of a hand a bit hidden. We have a lot of 10x that could take the same line. Villain could call a river and 3-bet with their stronger trips. As it turned out, the cutoff had ace 10 of diamonds.
Mm-hmm.
So he had ace 10 suited. And if you go onto the forums and look at the results, I posted the final range of our opponent. Ace 10 of diamonds is right there.
Yep.
So we got it the whole way. And and again, Eric, when he had the time to think about it, by making this last post, he came to the same conclusion we did with our Flopzilla work, that our opponent could never have a full house, and very rarely would he have a better flush.
Yep, I love it. So a few thoughts just before we close out the episode. I like this comment from Tim in the chat. Does Hat Guy look like a bluffer? That's my analysis live. Yeah, that's right. I mean, when we are live, we don't have limits. We don't have access to the same kind of information. So you do have to make some of those generalizations, those live tells. I think that's true. So everyone, if you're listening to this, like I say, go buy Flopzilla. All of my coaching clients, I tell them the same thing. Now that you've bought Flopzilla, here's some free advice. Go to YouTube and look up Smart Poker Study. This is Sky Matsuhashi's free video series. He's got a number of great video playlists there. The one in particular that you're looking for is called 66 Days of Hand Reading. If you're a regular listener, you know I talked about this before. It's a series of videos where Sky uses Flopzilla to go street by street through various hands, and you can learn how to make assumptions about players, how to use the tools that Flopzilla makes available to become a better hand reader, to be a more precise hand reader. And what I will tell folks, this is my spin on it, is if you're feeling daunted by like, oh, how do I even pick a range to put them on in the first place? Like, how do I make these assumptions about what our opponent's playing? Do yourself. Take it. If you use Poker Tracker and you've got access to online hands that you played like 6 months or a year ago, take a hand of your own and toggle off the show known hole cards element of Poker Tracker Replayer. Pull up that hand and do hand ranging on yourself. You won't know what your hand was in that hand that you played 6 months ago, but you know what your opening range is from that position. You know the kinds of hands that you're going to bet with or check with or raise with. And just like Rob is saying, if you do your job well, at the end of it, you're not going to have it narrowed down to one hand, but you're going to have it narrowed down to a narrower range of hands. And what you want to see is at the end, does the actual hand that your opponent have fit into that range? Can you find it in that range like Rob did? And he said, sure enough, there's your ace 10 of diamonds. It's one of the hands that we narrowed his range down to. And that made it easier for us to make good assumptions and good decisions about how to play against that range later. So, this is great. So another comment from DJ saying 66 days of hand reading is my warm up every day before play. Once you get 66 days in, you won't remember day one. Yeah, that's right. It's a free video series. It's really informative. Sky Matsuhashi knows what he's talking about. He's been a great friend of the show for a long time. And I love nothing more than sharing these fantastic resources with our members and our audience, even though, as I say, we don't benefit from it at all, but it's just too good information to put out there. And another great point from Tim here, saying that this also improves your confidence and your ability to believe what your brain should be telling you, because that is important. You know, the back of your brain is doing all sorts of work at the poker table that you don't even know it's doing. And the more you play, the more experienced you get, the more often you put yourself in situations like this, the more you train your brain between sessions to make these kinds of poker decisions, the more you can trust your gut, the more you can trust that, oh, my brain's trying to tell me something about this. And, your gut's getting smarter too. The smarter you get, the more studying you do, that gut is getting smarter too. So don't be afraid to trust it. Thanks to DJ and Tim for joining us on the show tonight. We've got some really good comments from them in the Zoom chat. doing the chats edition too long, Rob. Rob, is there anything else we should add? I want a big shout out to Eric Binkley Gin for posting another fantastic cash hand for us here. Rob, is there anything we should mention before we roll on out of here?
No, I think both players played that hand very well.
Yeah, me too. At first, I felt like that river raise was a little spazzy by our villain, but given that they actually had ace 10, it actually makes a lot of sense. It's a pretty savvy thin value raise, and I don't think it's a spazzy anymore. But it really took going through all the combos to see that, and so I'm really glad that we took that exercise. Well, yeah, thanks to DJ and Tim, thanks to Eric, thanks to Rob Washam for being the talent tonight, and of course, thanks to the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, Casino, and Racetrack, Hotel, and Casino. Thank you, Running Aces, and thank you, the listeners. We'll see you again next week. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks again.